Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomena, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
Welcome back to another edition of Cal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is the one and only Rob McConnell. Folks, I say it at the beginning of every show. You know the routine. We cover everything on this show from politics to the paranormal. That's a wide variety of subjects. Nothing is off limits. So let's do a brief recap of international news, and then we'll continue to pick up from last week's show, which was about the media. That is a handful of companies controlling about 90% of the large Western global media. All right, to recap the headlines going around, there was a very important election finally in England. After years of being politically screwed up, let's be polite, and having different elections and prime minister resign and replaced with Boris Johnson, they had another election, and now this time Johnson has won in a landslide vote. British voters have apparently said with their ballots that they don't like Jeremy Corbyn, which is good because he hates Israel. He's a far-left nut job, and you can quote me. And I hope he, goes and parties with his buddies in Gaza, and Hamas. He loves those guys. Let him go celebrate there, Let him go figure out his political future in Gaza. Looks pretty bright. Anyway, I'm glad, as a journalist who has covered Brexit and lived in Europe for 10 years, I love the UK, although I have my views on London, a different issue, and the royal family and all that stuff. I'm glad that they finally are going to make some progress, because what they need to do is go back to serving what the voters wanted them to do. To recap what happened, the British government, or the UK, Great Britain, I just call it Britain, it's great, not a world empire anymore, thankfully, it wants to leave the EU. And there's positives on that, and there's also a bunch of negative stuff too. And of course, that upsets the ivory tower bureaucrats in Brussels, who of course want one big EU happy family. And of course, they want to force other nations to do things that they don't want to do. That's kind of the price you pay when you join the EU. I saw that when I lived in the Czech Republic, when they joined the EU. I'll come back to that in a moment, but let's explain why the thing in England is significant. A few years ago, what happened is, because of voters being upset with the way that decisions were being made without their input by the people who live in ivory towers in Brussels, typical government bureaucrats, enough people signed a petition to put a referendum on the ballot to say, do you want to leave or stay in the EU, yes or no? And what happened is vested interest. It was a very polarizing issue. What happened is the so-called experts, these are the same people who predicted Hillary Clinton would beat Donald Trump to the White House. We know how that worked out. They predicted that there was not even a need to do a serious campaign to convince people of the obvious that it would be a stupid thing to leave the European Union. So the prime minister at the time, he resigned. He said he would resign if the referendum passed. So he did. He also resigned because he didn't want to be in power when everything blew up in his face, let's be honest. And this is Cameron, of course. So then he gets replaced by Theresa May. And it was very obvious to anybody who covered that. I wrote about this in Daily World, that in many full-page specials, that she was going to fail. Because what happened is Boris Johnson basically pulled a Donald Trump. And this is a very valid analogy. You see, Boris Johnson is basically the UK's version of Donald Trump, minus, the bankruptcies and minus being a multi-billionaire because his father gave him money, he inherited it, born into a rich family, etc. Anyway, make a long story short, Boris Johnson was pushing to leave Brexit. He was one of the chief architects of the Brexit initiative, which, despite the, tea leaf reading and psychic predictions or whatever, analysis by the so-called experts, they said it wouldn't pass, had no chance in hell. It did pass barely. And there was one very interesting pattern in that election or that referendum. Basically, the people in London voted to stay in the EU. Okay? Everyone outside London voted to leave it. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that, like California in the U.S., what goes on in London doesn't really reflect the mood or reality of the rest of the country. And you can also say probably that in Scotland as well, and Ireland and Wales and so on. Anyway, there's a disconnect between what goes on in London versus the rest of Britain. And I know that, having seen it firsthand, I first noticed it not the first time when I went to the UK, when this was back in the time when, Princess Diana was still alive and so on. But what I saw when I went there around the time of the Gulf War, Second Gulf War, this would be in the early 2000s, I was actually invited to give 4 lectures in London, which I did at the Commonwealth Club. 40 and Times magazine held their annual unconvention, and I was the main speaker. I spoke on 6 subjects. A lot of you know them: Meyer, Kennedy, Bigfoot, so on. At that time, we were promoting the fact that the man who wore the Bigfoot suit had been found. He was going to be put back in a costume, recreate this famous Patterson hoax. The person who was making the costume is the one who sold it to Roger Patterson in the 60s. There's no question that did happen. In fact, when we were filming for National Geographic for that TV special, I got to see one of the actual Bigfoot feet that people would wear back then from the 1960s that the costume maker had sold to Patterson. And it was neat seeing that because it was a relic. And what's interesting is one of the most incriminating smoking guns, if you will, visually against the authenticity of the Patterson film. And a lot of people have not figured this out because, well, for whatever reason, you'd have to ask what excuse they give. Well, it turns out that the Bigfoot suit that was made by the costume maker and sold to Roger Patterson, and there's no question, Patterson even admitted that he bought a Bigfoot suit to, do some experimenting. He didn't say he used it for a hoax, but what are the odds, folks, that he would order a suit and then magically see Bigfoot a short time later? I'm sorry, the whole thing stinks. Anyway, if you look carefully at a good copy, that is color corrected, of the Patterson film, and I've seen one of only 2 original prints, meaning the only master print made from the original. I saw it when I was working on World's Greatest Hoaxes, Secrets Finally Revealed, because Fox had to get that exact copy to use it in the movie with permission of Patterson's widow, of course, for money. And what happened is when you look at that, again, the most pristine copy of this thing, closest to the original that you can get, you see something very interesting. Not only do you see evidence of something in the eye, and Hieronymus, the guy, Bob Hieronymus, who wore the Bigfoot suit and helped fake it, he has a glass eye. Wow, amazing coincidence, folks. And then the other thing is that the fur itself came from China. It's called Dynel, D-Y-N-E-L, and it's only available from China. So Bigfoot must have walked across the, Bering Strait? Is that what we're going to believe? No, he didn't. It was a man in a costume. The fur is ordered, the fake fur, from China. It's Dynel. It looks exactly like Patty in the Sasquatch movie because Bigfoot apparently likes Dynel fur. Or maybe Dynel fur was reverse engineered from a clone Bigfoot. I don't know. Of course, I'm just making that up. But Dynel fur, smoking gun. It's like looking at Billy Meyer's laser gun photo and realizing that the hand holding it is from a mannequin. It's kind of obvious once you get that in your head. Anyway, okay, so back to what we were talking about. What happened is in the election in the UK, Boris Johnson pushed for Brexit to happen. And then when it barely passed by about, I think, 2.5%, again, the demographics where everyone in London was voted to stay in. Everyone outside London said, let's leave, let's get out of here. It can't happen fast enough. Well, then at that point, Boris Johnson said, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm going to step back and let the prime minister handle this. Now, he knew at that point the prime minister would resign. Prime minister, again, said he would if it happened. He also didn't want to be the person to get crucified when he fell. So then Theresa May ends up being the hapless caretaker prime minister. 3 separate times they tried to get the Brexit thing through. This was 3 major times. There were many other efforts. I wrote a lot of articles about this. In fact, I remember discussions with Ajit Chalk, the editor at Daily World. It's like, we're going to do Brexit for this special again? Yeah, because they're going to vote, and this time they'll really get it through. Then they wouldn't. So that's how the reporting on this went. Hurry up and wait. So then they had the election, and Boris Johnson slaughtered his opponent, the Jew-hating, Israeli-hating Jeremy Corbyn, far-left extremist who's buddies with Hamas and other terrorists, apologists for them as well. He makes no apology for it. Again, you can Google his quotes. This is not my spin on it. Don't take my word for it. Check it yourself, please. Jeremy Corbyn, look him up. Just Jeremy Corbyn, Jew-hater. Punch it in there. You'll come up with a lot of hits. Anyway, now that that's settled, Johnson has a mandate. Get out of the EU. So what does the EU do now? The EU is mad because they're like, wow, this is really going to happen. So now the bureaucrats at Brussels are saying, watch out for Great Britain now. It's going to be a rival to the EU. Be careful. Well, no kidding. Any country that's not part of the EU, that's in Europe, hello, is going to be a rival. In fact, I got news for the people in London who live in their ivory towers. Russia isn't a member of the EU because if they were to become a member, they would have to be subservient to the rest of Brussels, and they won't do that. In fact, if Russia were to join the EU, it would dominate it because it would have the most representative members in parliament because it's based on total population. This is one of the reasons Turkey is pushing to join the EU, because if it were ever granted that right, and it should not be, it's never been European, let's be blunt, they would be the dominant factor in all the EU. They would have more votes than Germany does. And Germany now is the king pinmaker country because they have the largest population, despite suffering a lot of deaths in World War II. They've rebounded. But Turkey's is slightly bigger, so they would enter at least tied to Germany. And based on demographics, with the Western population shrinking, Turkey would be dominant. All right, we'll be back after this commercial break, and we'll continue with an update, and then we'll talk about media control of everything you're hearing.
Patty Conklin grew up in Brooktondale, New York, with a unique ability. Unlike others, she could see how the vibration of words and emotions affected the physical body. She discovered how to release stored emotion and facilitate healing. This began today's Conklin method of cellular cleansing. The private practice grew with tremendous results, as did her reputation. More and more people sought her out, bringing her into the home for healing. She soon realized she could even teach this to others, and they could shift perception and thus prevent illness from occurring. Patty Conklin quickly became a frequent keynote speaker, and she developed a curriculum for teaching the Conklin method of cellular cleansing. For more information, visit pattyconklin.com, PATTICONKLIN, pattyconklin.com, or call 404 404-0086. That's 404-474-0086.
Mission Evolution is dedicated to the well-being of the planet and animals, as well as the evolution of humankind. One major factor threatening all three is increasing toxicity. Heavy metals and other environmental toxins are poisoning our bodies, deteriorating our brains, blocking our spiritual connection, and shortening our lives. Yet these poisons are extremely difficult to remove. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, and I recently became aware of a product created from the marriage of nature and nanotechnology called Vitality. It's formulated from zoolite, whose crystalline structure binds toxins, gently carrying them out of the body. The light is only as clear as the window through which it shines. Clear your body, shine your light into the world. Visit vitalityhappens.com for a 20% discount. Enter code PATHHOME.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
Welcome back to the second segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Corfin. I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. We're talking about what's gone on in England. Again, they've had a huge election. What makes it big and historic is that they finally have some results they can move forward with. In the past, last couple of years, despite the efforts by Theresa May, which were really sincere, politics got in the way. You know, the very people who said, Johnson included, that, you know, they wanted to leave the EU, then they stepped back and let the people in power try to sort it out, and they blew it, of course. That was predictable. Wrote about that again in articles over the years covering this. So then Johnson comes in after Theresa May resigns, and he's trying to push Brexit through. It didn't work the first time, so they have an election to try to move it forward. And then he ends up holding all the marbles, a landslide. So now they're going to leave the EU. Now he's got to get it done. Based on the votes, it's going to happen. Now Brussels is going to start to declare war on England because there's a real problem here now. England wants many of the same rights and privileges that EU membership gave them. And the EU has told them where to stick it, and then it's not going to happen. I'll give you a real example. In the EU, they are so controlling with their laws and regulations that if a banana is not arced and curved the right number of degrees minimum, it cannot be sold. Okay? Now, the American equivalent stupidity of that are laws in California and elsewhere where if an apple is not a certain size, it cannot be sold. So guess what happens to the apple? In our infinite wisdom, it gets left on the ground, it rots and it wastes for no valid reason. In the world, about half the food every day is wasted, and yet there are people dying of starvation. Go figure. So in the UK, what has happened is they want the same type of laws that the EU forced them to take, but they want to kind of line item veto them. So when the Brexit result came back, that the polls showed that the results of the referendum showed that, you know, a bare majority wanted to leave. They wanted 4 or 5 years' time to exit, and the EU said no, and that's logical. The reason that they wanted to stall for this time is they wanted to go through all the EU laws and basically pass them through the British Parliament. I remember covering this in the news. It was a shocker to hear British politicians tell me and other journalists that, yeah, what we're going to do now is we're going to have to introduce in Parliament every single law that the EU passed so that we have the same laws, so that getting along with the EU will be much easier. Well, okay, but let's be honest. No government, unless it's a dictatorship, passes laws one after another with no delays, changes, games, whatever. Look at the sabotage that goes on between the political parties in the West, especially the United States. It's the divided states of America right now. It's never been more polarized. So what happened is they started to pass a bunch of these laws and basically say up or down votes, yes or no. But then things like import duties and taxes started getting in there. It's like, well, yeah, we want duty-free importing of goods from everywhere else in Europe. And the EU has told them no, because you're not a member of the EU. And the only way you get that, that's one of the points of being the EU, like NAFTA, it's one big business-free trade zone. And Russia has said they're not going to join the EU because they would lose their sovereignty, even though they dominate the EU. So Russia is its own thing, separate from Europe, even though it's part of Europe. And now Britain is not going to be part of the EU, but it is part of Europe. And now in the news today, just waiting, this was predictable, people in Scotland now are trying to say, we want out. And that's rather interesting because a lot of Scottish people, it's about 50-50, a slight majority want them to leave, part of being the United Kingdom, because they don't really have the full representation or sovereignty as if they were their own standalone nation. They're essentially kind of a vassal nation, for lack of a better term, of Britain. Let's be blunt. They have their own parliament, but, not much else. They don't have full rights in that parliament. And there are people who want to be in their own country. They want their own country of Scotland. And this is where it's going to be interesting, because Britain can't really force Scotland not to leave. It can try to punish it economically. But unless there's a deal cut between Scotland and Britain now, Britain's going to be punished economically, because Scotland can say, wink, wink, well, we'd love to help you, British buddies, but, we got to do what the EU says, otherwise we get in trouble. So I'm sorry, we got to impose that import tax on you. So this is going to be very interesting, because Ireland is also talking about maybe leaving too. It's not happy with the tax havens that it has given companies like Apple. And then to have the EU come along and say, well, now that you've given them a tax haven, we're going to take billions of dollars in taxes from them. And of course, you get screwed because these companies won't set up in Ireland anymore because they're blaming you for what happened. Even though you didn't do it, we did it in Brussels. Yeah, that's the game going on. In fact, Apple lost a court judgment, and other tech companies have. It's now being appealed, and we'll see who wins. It's going to set a precedent that is potentially dangerous if it's not done right. The fact is, the European bureaucrats, as epitomized by the EU, it's the EU, really nobody else, they want to add more taxes to the big American tech companies. They want more of a piece of the pie. And they have all kinds of excuses for doing it. I remember, for example, when I first moved to Prague in the year 2000, I'm a journalist working for Prague Post newspaper. And I went in to make some photocopies. I had to photocopy some of my documents for the embassy. And I go to pay the tax, and it's 19% value-added tax on everything. That pays for everything, theoretically, your social services, parts of your metro, your medicine, socialized medicine, so on. The so-called perks of a civilized society. Anyway, so I'm going to pay, and then the guy says, you owe me about 9% more. And I said, why? He says, because there's a tax for artists in the EU. Because artists get their stuff ripped off all the time, and copyright enforcement is uneven, we have this extra surcharge, and the money goes into the European Union, and it's given out to artists as compensation. So I told the interesting worker at the copy place, I said, it was Copy General. I said, I'm an artist, I'm a journalist, I'm a writer. I haven't seen a single dime of this. Where do I get my share? And of course, they didn't have an answer because there really is no such thing. It's just an excuse to take money, and then they do whatever with that money. There's no transparency, no accountability. And the artists, all of the thousands and thousands or millions of writers out there, whatever, in Europe, they're not getting anything from this fund. It's a complete fraud and farce. So I would go to other places that didn't charge this because to me, it was just theft. So anyway, there's some very interesting things going on in Europe, and it's much bigger than just this idea that, you know, they have this porous immigration policy. Refugees from war-torn areas are flooding into Europe, causing the standard of living to go down and all that. We've heard all those claims. To some degree, that is true, meaning Germany itself mismanaged the immigration crisis deliberately, by the way. We have to remember that Angela Merkel was totally against allowing anybody in until she had a private meeting with Obama. And then, not coincidentally, a lot of money flowed from the U.S. into Germany. And then all of a sudden, she's a champion of immigration reform. 1 million people come in there from war-torn countries. They aren't vetted. 9 out of 10 were not cleared. Okay, 9 out of 10 didn't even have proper travel documents. And of course, ISIS and other terrorist groups exploited that, put some terrorists in there. They said they were going to do it the moment this opening the floodgates was announced. They actually put it on social media and released videos saying, we're going to do this to you. And people like me who kind of take what terrorists say seriously, I reported on it, as did others. Nothing was done. And then, of course, terrorist attacks happened. And then Merkel and other politicians are shocked and outraged. And how is this possible? It's so bad. At that point, these people shouldn't even be in office anymore. And if you look at what's happened in Germany, it's in serious political trouble, meaning the far right is rising again in Germany. It's like they didn't learn the lesson in the first 2 world wars. Today, Airbnb suspended, I think it was 500 accounts or so. I may have the number wrong, but they were run by Nazis who were holding events using Airbnb. And I will tell you, I've seen real Nazis in person, meaning when I lived in Prague, every year on the anniversary of the sick event Kristallnacht, the night that the Nazis destroyed Jewish property and started to arrest Jews and put them in the first concentration camp, Dachau, about 12 kilometers just outside Munich, been there several times. On the anniversary of Kristallnacht, these Nazis from Germany come through Prague, exercising their free speech and freedom of assembly to march. And people like me, when I lived there, I volunteered for a couple years in a row to help patrol the old Jewish quarter historic neighborhoods so that windows and shops wouldn't be vandalized or destroyed or graffitied by these Nazis. And these are real Nazis, real Germans. I speak German. I could talk to some of them. Even to go in and out of them that night when the police were arresting them, I had shaved my head so I could blend in as a skinhead. And I took advantage of the fact that Prague streets were deliberately designed to confuse invading armies. So when people asked me for directions and they were there to join the protest for the Nazis, I sent them in the wrong direction with pleasure, but they didn't know it. Anyway, we'll come back after this commercial break to continue this, but we'll talk about Europe, what's going on in Germany, and then again, we'll talk about media control.
Audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
Join Patty Conklin and Healing Within Radio each week. More than entertainment, Healing Within offers educational, useful tools for everyday life. Listen for help overcoming fear, anxiety, and depression. Patty knows about eliminating cancer, MS, dementia, Parkinson's, and a host of illnesses that we face every day. Life can be good. Life is good. All you need are simple tools to start changing your life. Start right now by visiting pattyconklin.com, PATTICONKLIN. No matter where you are in the world, you can work with Patty through Skype, phone, or in person, visiting one of her retreats in Georgia. Visit pattyconklin.com today or call our offices at 404-474-0086. That's pattyconklin.com or call 404-474-0086.
Coming soon to the X Zone Broadcast Network is A Different Perspective with me, Kevin Randall, as your host. We'll be taking a close look at what is happening in the world of UFOs today with side trips into the paranormal. Guests will range from those who are household names to those who have a different perspective on a variety of topics. No topic will be taboo, but there will be tough questions asked as we all search for the truth about UFOs, the paranormal, and those things that excite us. Sometimes we'll agree with a guest and sometimes we won't, but we'll try to keep the program topical. For those of you who would like to read, be sure to visit www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com and remember to listen to the other fine programs on the X Zone Broadcast Network at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show on the X Zone Broadcast Network. Once again, my name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. So the reason I mentioned that I have met and have helped police in the past in Prague deal with the Nazi issue, and I didn't play a major role. There's no bravado or whatever in here, but I did my little part in helping mislead some of them into the waiting police vans around the corner, things like that, because they thought I was a fellow skinhead. I spoke German, etc. It worked. They were that stupid. Got footage of it all anyway. The reason I'm mentioning it is because when I saw these Nazis up close, and I could hear what they were saying in German, of course, and they wouldn't speak Czech, because even if they did, because it's a Slavic language, and according to Nazi doctrine, if you're not pure Aryan, you are subhuman. It's just a question of what degree. They consider Jews to be the lowest, of course, and Slavic people to be, which would include Czechs, Russians, and Poles, and so on, to be, of course, subhuman as well. In fact, Hitler's sick ideology was that once he defeated Russia, he was actually going to sterilize the entire population. That's a historical fact. What he was going to do is make sure that the kids never had an education greater than 8th grade, just enough to serve their German masters, quote unquote, and then he would sterilize them so that they would control the population since they outnumbered Germany's, and then they would make them essentially slaves and, make them slaves to the land and the German masters. And Hitler had resettled a lot of Germans in the Russian territories in the early parts of the war because they were, they're colonizing. So when I met some of these Nazis, what struck me about them was that some of them were really hardcore. The ones in America are a joke compared to the ones in Germany. The ones in America don't even speak German. That makes them a bad Nazi right away. And then, of course, if you try to debate with a Nazi, it's not going to work because science doesn't apply. And, of course, they don't get science. So I enjoyed asking them and peppering them with questions, like what color was so-and-so from history? And they didn't seem to really understand, although they did when it was explained to them that, white people are the minority in the world. They're actually late in the evolutionary chain, and that for millions of years, if you believe in evolution, humans were basically dark-skinned. Get over it. And if anybody's white-skinned and they live in hot areas and where there's a lot of sun, go to India, live there for 20 years, your skin's going to change, believe me. So it was just interesting in that I found it ironic that in the Czech culture, in Czech law, it is illegal to show the swastika. When you go to some of these army surplus stores or stores that sell antiques from World War II or any period in history, whenever you saw something from Nazi Germany, let's say an eagle with the swastika under it, they would have something taped over the swastika. The reason why is because if you show that symbol, you can go to jail. That's the law there. But yet they allow the hammer and the sickle from the Soviet Union. And that is a symbol of hatred. In fact, Stalin killed more people than Hitler could possibly even hope to. That's a historical fact. Chairman Mao, another wonderful genocidal communist, is the largest mass murderer in known human history. 2.5 times at least more people killed than Stalin killed. Stalin killed at least twice as many as Hitler did, but Hitler gets all the bad press. So in the Czech Republic, you cannot display a symbol of hatred. The swastika is on that list, okay? But these Nazis are allowed to march in Prague using free speech and freedom of assembly, but they can't show the swastika symbol. So they've changed their name from the German Democratic, Workers' Party and all that, NASDAQ, to the basically the German Workers' Party, or they call themselves the New German Workers' Party. They're Nazis. It's the same thing. The uniforms are a knockoff of the old brown shirts, but again, there's no swastikas visible because the police would use that as a justifiable excuse to immediately arrest them and take them away. Now, what about the issue of free speech? Okay, well, free speech laws in the West, in the United States as an example, are rather hypocritical. If you yell fire in a crowded theater, that is a crime, even though it's free speech, but it's not protected. Libel and slander is not protected free speech either. All right? People should remember that in the UFO field especially. Yet, on the other hand, if I'm a Nazi or I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan or some hate group, Antifa, I can hold a march. I can even fill out a permit, pay money, and get permission from the city to hold an event on this date, on this time, and say the most hateful things, all because free speech. I'm sorry, folks. If hate speech is not protected free speech, then why do we allow the Nazis to march at all? The Nazis are not about peace. The communists are not about peace. There's no question that is a fact. They may claim opposite, but they claim a lot of things. That doesn't mean it's true. So I've never understood why the American Nazi Party is allowed to basically do what they want and hold their marches, and they're legally protected. And yet people who try to stop it or have a problem with that, they end up prosecuted. I'm sorry, if they're obeying the laws, they shouldn't be harassed at all. So I admire the Czech laws, but I don't understand why the Nazis can come in there and give their speeches. They're not showing a symbol of hatred, but their words are living, organic, breathing, literally examples of hatred. So again, there's a disconnect there. But in Germany today, because of the way Merkel has mismanaged her government, and the immigration issue is a big issue, you can't blame Germans for being upset over that, the far right has risen. But the far right ultimately eats itself because that ideology is not sustainable. It is actually, it's hate-based. And anything hate-based is going to ultimately destroy itself. Just like if you love something so much that you're so naive, you end up imploding yourself as well. Both are two extremes. And that's the problem here. I remember as a kid, and I'll never forget this, I've talked about it before. Again, on October 19, 1973, I remember the date. I've talked about it for years. That's when all this hit me as a young boy. And what I saw was this belief in the stupidest, craziest things by so-called intelligence adults, even ones with PhDs, believing in everything from the ability to move objects with your mind to being able to astro travel to another planet and tell you what's going on there. It's just so ridiculous. I remember being excited about UFOs as a young kid in 11th grade. They're all in the news. I want to find out what's going on. So I go down to the library, and I literally checked out every single book there, read them all. And I'm reading George Adamski, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. I've been into astronomy since the second grade. I know damn well there's not aliens on the backside of the moon. I know damn well that there aren't aliens on Venus either. In fact, I remember seeing as a boy the photographs of the surface of Venus from the Russian space probe, the Zond, that landed there. They were the first ones to do it. They beat the U.S. And I'm sorry, the surface of the temperature of Venus is so hot that lead would melt just sitting there, around 800 degrees. So this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, voluptuous, Semyazi-looking Nordic goddess woman is talking to Adamski on Venus? I don't think so. Physics just don't work that way. So I remember reading this, and I remember thinking, why would anybody claim this is true? And then I realized, wow, adults really do lie. In fact, based on all these books, they lie a lot, and they put it in writing, and they get paid to lie by publishers. Wow, that was a big revelation for someone who's just 11, trying to sort it out. So what happened was, as I grew up, again, being mentored by everybody from Hynek to Friedman, most of the people I talked to in the UFO field, who was famous back then and delved in science and UFOs, this includes Dr. Carl Sagan, they didn't know I was a kid. They just thought they were responding to somebody with a typewriter. They didn't know I was a kid with a typewriter, but it was me. And some of those articles I have released after all these years. They're out there. They've been there since the 70s, but they're not on the internet, so right-click wonders don't know about them, or they're in denial of them, or they won't get off their duff and bother to contact a newspaper to get a real copy, because if it's not on Google, it must not be true, right? Or it must not exist, or must never have happened. Or if it's on Google and Google says XYZ, it really must be true. Boy, it's really stupid what people believe now. So as we segue away from Britain and the Nazis and all that stuff, just saying it's going to be very interesting on that continent, let's now switch back to what we were talking about on the show last week, and we'll end this part and the last segment of the show on this. And that is this very real issue that a handful of companies now, deliberately empowered by the Democrats and Republicans to take over all of this with the so-called fine interests of competition in mind, right? Competition is supposed to be good, but yet the government repeatedly, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, over the years, since the 90s, since Bill Clinton was president, yes, it is really traceable to one guy starting it, they have allowed corporate vested interests to take over everything. And of course, these guys fill their coffers to run for office. In fact, there were some studies that were done years ago by Harvard, Princeton, and they showed that ever since the process, they said that the process to becoming an oligarchy in the U.S. started under Ronald Reagan, trickle-down economics, but it really kicked into high gear under Bill Clinton when he decided to essentially outsource America's manufacturing future to communist China, which of course has happened. Try buying anything you use in your life that's not made in China. Good luck with that. You have to live a very different life. So after the commercial break, we're going to talk about media control and why it has a direct bearing on the project that Rob and I are going to be releasing soon, the Annie Jacobsen expose book, and why we're not going to be controlled by big media.
If you are looking for a safe, zero-calorie natural option to the harmful artificial sweeteners on the market today, Just Like Sugar is what you're looking for. Just Like Sugar is a wonderful natural alternative for those health-conscious people who choose a calorie-restricted diet with a great, pure, sweet flavor that tastes just like sugar. Just Like Sugar is a great natural option for people suffering from diabetes and may be useful in restricted diet programs where standard sugars are not allowed and does not cause a laxative effect of some other sweeteners. Just Like Sugar comprises a perfect blend of chicory root fiber, natural calcium, natural vitamin C, and Just Like Sugar's sweetness comes from the natural flavors from the peel of the orange. Just Like Sugar is a natural alternative to harmful artificial sweeteners and will change the way that you believe all natural sweetener products taste. Just Like Sugar is available at your local Whole Foods markets, Wild Oats markets, Henry's, Sun Harvest, and many other fine natural food stores in the U.S., Canada, and worldwide. They are here, and they've been here for thousands of years, making their presence known in the shadows. They might be seen by a lonely motorist on a deserted road late at night, or by a frightened and confused husband in the bedroom he is sharing with his wife. But who are they? What do they want? Why are they here? Perhaps most concerning, has the government been aware of their presence all along? The new book by Ellie Marzulli, UFO Disclosure, the 70-year cover-up exposed, delves into the world of UFOs. Can full disclosure be soon? Order now and receive a free hour and 37-minute DVD on the UFO phenomenon. UFOs are real. Get both the book and the DVD, a $40 value, for only $19.99. To order your book and DVD today, go to lamarzulli.net. That's LAMARZULLI.net.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Memorable dynamic presentations are a not-so-secret weapon in the business world. Do you have a powerful message that must be shared, but you haven't found a way to deliver that message? Do you want to be known as a top public speaker who gets amazing results? Are you ready to create and deliver your powerful message? Thomas Hides can help you create and deliver your speech to get the results you desire. Visit iconquality.com.
Did you expect your business to flourish, but instead it plateaued or didn't get off the ground yet? Would you like to achieve massive goals and discover new sources of income within your business? When you're ready to experience that type of success with fast results, Cindy Hendricks is the business coach for you. Her work with entrepreneurs and business owners has been life-changing. To get you and your business where you want to be, go to imaginemoresuccess.com.
Has the fear of public speaking stalled your business or personal life? What would you give to develop and maintain supreme confidence? Have an invaluable private program to always perform at your best. Imagine how you would feel. You can have all that and so much more today with Thomas Hides' life-changing course called Number One Fear Unleashed. Visit numberonefear.com and be liberated from your fear of public speaking.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, as we were talking about segueing here into the subject of control of most of the media by a handful of companies, let's go back to a couple of decades ago when a company called AT&T, I'm sure you've all heard of it, was theoretically broken up into baby bells by the U.S. government. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the lawsuit to break up the baby bells was started by people who wanted to get in that business. So companies like Sprint signed on for that, and they won. So what happened was the baby bells were broke up. Yeah, right. Sorry, folks. Just search again on how many Baby Bells have been reacquired by the big guys like AT&T, and you'll see that Humpty Dumpty is pretty much back together again. In fact, things are so incestuous that T-Mobile, Verizon, those guys, and Verizon and T-Mobile were just given permission to merge, again, in the interest of competition, right? The fewer players there are in the market, the more competition there is, right? Only if you're a corrupt politician in Washington, D.C. would you think that way, but that's what they do, and that's what they're doing. So what has happened is AT&T is a perfect poster child for what is wrong with most of big media today. And again, the U.S. government has given this its blessing. It's also happening elsewhere in the civilized Western world. AT&T, again, American Telephone and Telegraph Company, they essentially were the phone company that the U.S. used, just like the U.S. used to have only a single post office. All right, so AT&T also develops Unix, the most powerful operating system in the world. It was developed to handle the biggest network in the world, the U.S. phone system. It's infinitely scalable. That's why Apple uses it with the Mach BSD kernel. Again, when you use your iPhone and Apple Watch, you're using Unix. That's why it spanks any Android device, because a BSD kernel, Mach kernel developed at MIT, Carnegie Mellon, come on, folks. It's the next operating system is now in the Mac. It's in iOS. It's in your iPad. It's in your Apple Watch. Again, Apple owns the roost on that. They're not the biggest company in the world by accident. Now, on AT&T, they had, of course, the phone lines. Then the internet came out. Then, of course, data is sent over those phone lines. So what has happened over the years as the Baby Bells were broken up, quote unquote, is that the internet has become the main way of communicating along with cellular technology. Did you ever think, for example, as a UFO researcher, people used to claim in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, oh, if there were only more cameras out there, we'd get all this other hard evidence. Well, there's billions of cameras out there now. Everyone's got one, a very good one, a video camera in their smartphone. Are there billions of UFO videos showing up? No, because I guess the aliens are always one step ahead of us, right? No, the fact is it isn't going on like these hucksters claim. It's called cause and effect. If everyone has a camera and UFOs suddenly aren't being captured everywhere, then guess what? It ain't happening. It's kind of common sense. So AT&T, imagine you're AT&T. You've got the pipelines to send the data through. You've got the pipelines to send digital data through. That could be video, could be audio, could be both, could be anything. It's internet. Okay, so now you've got the pipelines. But in order to get people to tune in, you got to give them a reason. So you need content, right? Content is ultimately king. People tune in for a reason, at least one. Okay, nothing exists just for the heck of it or for no purpose. So how do you get a vertical monopoly? You control the content. So what has happened? Companies like Yahoo, AOL, Huffington Post, they've been bought by the big guys who have the bandwidth that supply the data pipe that everybody smokes, basically. So when you have a provider of that internet service, and they're also providing the content that you're watching, and maybe they're even producing it. Amazon is producing it, is producing their own stuff now. Apple is. You end up with a vertical market. Look at Disney. They're so vertical, it's amazing that nobody's bothered to break them up. Well, so far in the behavior of this government, as in the Trump administration, the only attempts that seem to be to break up any large companies are the ones that Trump doesn't like. Facebook, okay, Google. Other than that, he's very business friendly. In fact, so many regulations have been removed that if companies go back to their past bad behavior, people are going to die. Water controls are being removed. In fact, today in the news, they announced, it's not a new story, that the Trump administration is telling companies that own slaughterhouses, you're going to have to self-police now. Well, gee, that's really going to work, right, folks? There's a problem with the government policing it, let alone if you trust a company to do what's right when they're getting their meat cut and processed in God knows whatever third world country. Who knows? So this is what's going on now. So we have a situation, and a very real latest example here I'm going to share with you of, to illustrate the phrase, Houston, we have a problem. Look at the so-called Tic Tac case, the Nimitz encounters. The History Channel, which is history in name only, doesn't really cover real history anymore, did a series called The Unidentified. It exploited those cases, and it exploited the subject itself. It promised a lot of stuff. It didn't deliver it. People who thought critically knew better. We talked about it on the show, that it was just seemed to be a techno scam, that the data that Unidentified was presenting was hyped. And what's interesting about that is I know for a fact that the producers were told that there was a problem with this content. What I found out in dealing with the people who were involved, because I was working on these presentations for these networks, that included Discovery Channel, History Channel, CBS, etc. And again, CBS was a good guy, by the way. Discovery and History, no, not at all. And that's really disappointing because they're supposed to be different, right, folks? They used to be. That was one of the reasons people went to the History Channel, to see real history. Now, real history is epitomized by shows like Project Blue Book, which is fiction. You know, you got Hynek in there with a lesbian wife. You got Hynek in there investigating Roswell? No, he didn't. He didn't invent Skinwalker Ranch or investigate Skinwalker Ranch either. In fact, Blue Book and all that was over by the time the Skinwalker nonsense started. Now, what does all this have to do with anything? Well, it turns out that Discovery Networks, they own a thing, Travel Channel, and they have a thing called the Alien Highway. Ooh. So what they're doing is they're hyping these cases in one series because the same network interests own another series. And what they try to do is cross-market and cross-pollinate them. So if this UFO case is a hoax, but the Travel Channel is saying stop at Roswell to visit one of the 5 crash sites, right? There were 5 when I wrote my Roswell expose. There were 5. And I talked to the mayor, interviewed him. He's in the book. He said they get about 22% of their revenue in a good year from hyping the 5 crash sites. That's how they fund the city budget, by hyping a myth. I told him you should, put some Elvis signs there. There's probably some people who will pay for that too. He didn't appreciate my comment, but anyway. So what you have here is you have a network, History, Discovery. They own travel channels. They own these vertical market segment channels. And because it's all one big happy family, they don't want one entity of theirs on the right hand saying this is a hoax and the left hand saying it's real. At least they're consistent that way. So how do they solve all of this? Well, instead of telling you the truth, folks, they say it's all good. And that's why I came up with the term UFO believers. Okay, because again, I made up the term inspired by people who are believers who love Justin Bieber. And I'll tell you what my thinking is. I talked about it before real quickly. As I tried to tell UFO Jesus on Twitter, he said a UFO believer was someone who was a UFO believer who loved Justin Bieber music. No. In fact, I don't know of any UFO nuts who like Justin Bieber music. Maybe there's one out there. I don't know. I don't know him. But anyway, I said no. A believer is a Justin Bieber fan so hardcore that no matter what he does, it's all good. He can never do anything wrong. Even when he urinates in public, it's okay. It's Justin. So those are believers. The press made up that term. The fans call themselves believers. So when I see UFO nutters, it's all aliens, all the time, all good. And even when it's not, well, there's always this other case where it is. They don't even want to look and learn any lessons of how they just blew it with both lips. I call them UFO believers because I think it fits. It's just not Justin. It's aliens from Zeta Ridiculous this time. So, as I've talked about in a few shows, there is an expose coming out very shortly now. It really is coming. Long overdue. It's a book called Annie Jacobsen's Area 51 Book Scandal. It is co-written by Rob and myself. I first wrote the original article in May of 2011, a couple weeks after Annie Jacobsen released her book. I was working at Daily Post newspaper. People came into the newsroom, teased me about it and said, can you believe this again from America? They said, you got to take it out. Being the author of the best-selling Roswell expose of all time, I knew that Roswell was not caused by Joseph Stalin and Joseph Mengele and all that other nonsense Annie Jacobsen said. So I wrote a paper. It went out there, bothered Annie Jacobsen. I don't care. Now it's been expanded into a book, and it's got a very interesting part added to it. There are 3 links in there to 3 audio interviews that Rob McConnell did with the main scientist, T.D. Barnes, that Annie Jacobsen depended on for her book. And he says Annie Jacobsen threw us under the bus, quote, unquote. And the details, again, are in the interview and in the book. Now, in the next show, we're going to talk about that because a new website is coming out, and we're going to make the Annie Jacobsen launch part of the first episode of the new show, UFOlogy or UFOOlogy, where Rob and I will talk about the latest UFO news and major cases, give you a Siskel and Ebert type thumbs up or thumbs down to help you separate fact from fiction and not become a ufologist. Join me next week. We'll be back for another episode.